Okay. I would like for all of us just to start with a big breath because that was a lot to take in. So we all just want to like take a breath in and or if you want to come out or go out on the F word, I like that too. So let's just do it one more time. A nice slow F word out. Fuck. Okay. And the only reason I do that is just because I think this can be a lot, and this is all amazing information, but I think sometimes one of the reasons that we all get overwhelmed by access, or we decide not to do it, or we make excuses, or whatever, is because there is a lot. And we're not expecting that everybody in this room is going to all of a sudden come away, even though the history is so important, the law is so important. But you guys are not social workers studying this for a PhD. You're people that are trying to just do something good for the people who are coming to your performances in the area of immersive access or immersive experiences. So that's what I'm going to kind of address, and I have like multiple.
Do you want me to click through?
Yeah, do you mind, Charlie? Thank you. So what I'm going to focus on is application, and I've tried to keep my slides a little more simple, not because simple is better, but just because for my own brain it helps me organize my thoughts. Starting with application, I think one of the first slides that I didn't put in this is we are all deviants. I think probably everybody in this room is involved in what they do because you are a deviant, and I don't necessarily mean that you do illegal behavior, but because we deviate from the norm. Every single person in this room deviates from the norm in some way. I think what society has done is those who deviate a little bit farther from the norm or from the structures we've set up in society, those are the people that we've deemed as disabled or that have disabilities. But really, we're all so close. So I think that's just something to keep in mind as we're going through this, that like people with disabilities, quote unquote, are not so totally different from you or any of us in this room. They might just have things that, again, have not been built into the normal structure or quote-unquote normal structure of doing things that's developed over the period of creating society and civilization. Okay. So, coming back to reasonable accommodation, thank you, Carol. The one thing that I'd like to highlight is that, yes, this is a broad definition. But broad means that there's some flexibility in it, right? So how wonderful. And even though we live in a society where reason seems to elude many people, we are still reasonable. And one of the things I also like to emphasize is that people with disabilities, quote unquote, are also reasonable. That we are not all out there, and I just say we because I do identify as a person with a disability, we as a disability community are not all out there to sue you because you fucked up on something. That is not our first point of contact with other people in society. Yes, are there litigators out there? Yes, and those litigators have disabilities, don't have disabilities all across the board. But don't engage as your first point of contact as, you know, you're just assuming that you're going to get sued or you're afraid of that. I think that's partly where a lot of the fear of engaging with disability has come from over the years. Because we do get the stories we see in the news are not the stories of, oh, Brenda went to a theater show this weekend and everything went really well and, you know, people were happy, she enjoyed the performance. That's not the news you get. You get the news about the one woman in the world who tried to take a peacock on a plane. Or you get the one story about how, you know, things didn't go so well. But just please be reminded, and I'll be happy to remind you again and again, that people with disabilities are reasonable. And most of all, I had a friend of ours, Jason Dorwart, who's also a performer from Phamaly, who once told me that the worst thing in the world is to feel insignificant. And as you can see from Lydia's historical presentation, people with disabilities have been made to feel insignificant throughout history. That's why often they may come in through your door, or if you don't have a door, because many of you are working in non-traditional environments, through your entry point. You know, with whatever you might call like a chip on your shoulder. Well, yeah, because in the same way that people with different gender identities, different racial identities have experienced a long history of being made to feel insignificant, that's their starting point at the time. But you guys can counter that by making people feel significant. And often that is the most important thing. If you make people feel significant, then all of a sudden, a lot of this stuff, you're already gonna be past it and moving on. Okay, so I think one of the big questions is, what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to build the most accessible, immersive environment ever known to man or woman or person? Which, by the way, just looking at Lydia's historical presentation, there's a lot of fodder there, so if anybody wants to build that really cool immersive experience that is all about access and disability history, I think there's a great opportunity there. But maybe that's not your point, that's not your intention, but I think it's important to clarify your intention. Are you trying to just be a more inclusive experience so that you have more knowledge about if there's a person who's deaf or hard of hearing comes to your show, you know how to work with that person? Or are you just trying not to get sued? Are you just trying not to be assholes? And there's no expectation about where you're supposed to fall in that. It's just you guys as individuals, as organizations, as however you identify your entity, that you have some clarity around what it is you're trying to achieve so that then you can set reasonable goals for that. And getting creative and trailblazing. So again, access I think is often thought about from a legal perspective or an obligatory perspective. And one of the brilliant and wonderful things about immersive experiences and the work that you all do is you're already coming up with new and different ways of doing things. And so one of the things, one of the things you can do is approach access in the same way. That this is an opportunity for you to get creative, and a lot of the world is not doing that. So you actually end up being trailblazers. If you're thinking about access as, oh, this is how we're going to move through this space in our immersive experience, and rather than making the wheelchair the exception, we're going to actually build it around a wheelchair so that that's the norm and other people are kind of accommodating to that. That is trailblazing, and that's getting creative. So thinking about access from a creative point of view as opposed to, I have to do this and, oh, we're going to get sued and this sucks. And that will help you, I think, just get more energized about it. So language, as Lydia pointed out and Carol, language is very important. However, that said, again, we're all individuals and we all have our own perspective. And if you ask people in the disability community, if you ask 10 people in the disability community what terms they like to use, you're probably going to get 10 different answers. So, it's not necessarily about pleasing people. Again, it's about just making sure that you're using probably the most acceptable terms at that point in time. I do have to share that as we were preparing for this presentation, we were going back and forth about the autism community and what their preferred terminology is. And you find different things. You find people that prefer to be called autistic. You find people that prefer to be called people living on the autism spectrum. I think the most important thing is being aware and being considerate. And so when you're thinking about language, think about also what is the language that you're using in your particular immersive experience. And how, again, can you get creative around this? I was mentioning one of our planning sessions, if you have something that's built around an extraterrestrial, space-like experience, and you're gonna call all of your participants aliens, then how can you maybe identify the people with disabilities who are coming, not as, weird aliens, but like maybe they're the Martians, and maybe the people who don't need wheelchair seats are the Plutonians, or Plutons. So thinking about how do you wrap in, how do you build new language? How do you not even allow a space for using language that's already been created and utilized and also loaded with a lot of social history? Maybe you come up with brand new language that fits your own experience. Okay. Something is better than nothing. So I think this is where a lot of us get caught up. It can feel like if we're gonna do access, then we have to do 100% access. But that sometimes is not reasonable for what we are doing, either in the immersive spaces or with the budgets that we have. But again, if you come back to that place of we're trying to make these people feel significant, these people that deviate a little farther from our norm. So starting with something. If it means that you can't necessarily provide ASL interpretation for this particular performance, okay, but maybe you think about building it into a future performance. If you can't necessarily provide a fully wheelchair experience, wheelchair accessible experience, can you still provide an option for somebody if they want to come, and you can work with them to solve a problem if they can't necessarily go the same path. One of my first immersive theater experiences was with Sleep No More in New York City, and when I went, I had a friend who was in the show, and so they had kind of given the performers a heads up that I was coming. And so, has anyone been to Sleep No More? So, you go and you're kind of like supposed to follow, well, at least I've heard, because I wasn't able to, but you're supposed to follow like a narrative through. And so, there would be performers performing, and then all of a sudden they would like take off and run up the stairs, and everybody's following after them, And the challenging thing about it was that then, I would go get on the elevator, and you get in the elevator, and it's just like you're waiting, and like you're missing the experience, The other side of that, though, was that I also had all the actors who would like lift their mask up a little bit and be like, "Come with me this way," So there's a way to, even if you have to have a parallel or different experience because of access, to still make it meaningful, to still make those people feel significant that you're leading into that different part of the experience. And again, interest and willingness are powerful. I think I will come back again and again to that, what Jason had said. Feeling insignificant is just awful. And the first thing you can do is just make people feel like they matter. And like they're not coming in and demanding something of you, that you want them to have an experience. If you're setting this cool thing up and everybody in Denver is gonna be talking about, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing thing ever, and then you have somebody that can't do it because they use a wheelchair and it wasn't built with wheelchairs in mind, or it is about a sound that you hear at the beginning of the story and that sound is not heard by people who are deaf or hard of hearing. It's just thinking about, okay, but if you have somebody who comes in and wants to be a part of it, is there a way to adapt? And the adaptation is the main skill here of thinking about how can you're already adaptive, you do immersive experiences, so how can you build that adaptation or expand that adaptation into access?